So that one also was discussed, how to ensure parity between boys and girls. The other issue was university education. We have places really where the access to higher education is still too low. In some countries like Niger and others, you get that only less than 2% of people have access to universities. You get a country that has only 3 universities and so on. So that again was discussed, because unless people also move the full cycle, they complete primary, they move to secondary, all of them, they complete secondary, and then after secondary they diverge, those that are following the theoretical academic line go to universities, others go to technical universities, others go to tertiary institutions of technical training. Then there is no way that Africans are going to compete with the rest of the world.
And what are you doing as an advocacy institution, because you conduct research in the East African region, to get us to wake up as a people to prioritize education and quality education at that?
At an organizational level, as Twaweza and Uwezo, our style, our contribution is to present evidence. So we have evidence that we share to show that the biggest crisis is actually not people attending school or attending university, is the quality of that education. The biggest crisis is that more than half of people attending any institution, especially public institutions, name them, are not getting quality of the appropriate level. The learning outcomes are very low across the board, not just at ECD and primary, but even up to university. So improving the quality of our education, improving the relevance, so that people completing secondary school and those completing technical training skills are also addressing the market demands in terms of the skills that are required to grow our economies.
How will we shift the situation in the market so as to maybe accept, or even the education system to actually adapt to the market scenario? Because we have a challenge there, there's a serious gap.
There is truly a serious gap. I think the best thing is to do a reverse logic, where we start with looking at our economies, which sectors are most important. We had this discussion started earlier in Kenya, when we had the deputy president, now was the minister for higher education, on saying, let us look at what our market demands. What skills are so critical for our countries right now?
What fails us from adopting these aggressive conversations?
And then moving backwards, I think, is a status quo. The people who are supposed to make decisions are in comfort zones. The people who are in universities are defending what they have, rather than looking objectively at really how they can serve our economies better. I think what we need is to wake up and realize that each of us has a contribution to make. And unless each one of us acts, then Africa and our economies will remain behind the rest of the world.
Do you think we have hope as the African continent? You've indicated that if we do not act, what are some of the actions we need to take? One, in Kenya, you've mentioned one, they need to change so that you can adopt a market-friendly graduates. What else do we need to do, right from lower institutions of learning?
One of the things we need to do is to stand up and say, every child who is aged 4 to 5 years, is in the Kenyan constitution, needs to have access to early stimulation, needs to have access to early childhood. Then we say that every child aged 6 to 14 years needs access to primary school. Then those that are completing primary school need to proceed, all of them, to secondary school, and which means expanding the secondary school sector, because even if we pass that now, 30% of those completing primary school will not have space in secondary school. So we need to attract private investment to expand the secondary school sector, but also ensure that first of all we have enough teachers employed by government, but also creating incentives for other people to employ and supply teachers, but also that those teachers that are in schools are accountable. They are in school every day, are in class, and are attending to each lesson when they're supposed to. That accountability, again, not just for Kenya, but for African economies, is a big issue that no one wants to talk about.
And the reason they don't talk about it is because there are serious gaps when it comes to the capacity of service providers. What conversation can we initiate on that end?
Accountability, I think, has to start from the top. It has to start in Kenya in the Ministry of Education, and then it trickles down. Unless I am accountable as the director, as the assistant director, as the quality assurance officer, as the district education officer, then there is no way I'll demand accountability from teachers. So this needs to start from the top, where we create a culture of being accountable. And also, at the same time, educating our parents, because parents also are failing schools. It is parents who are supposed to be raising issues. It is parents who are supposed to be saying our teachers are not teaching, and writing letters to the powers that be, so that change can happen. So parents also need to be a critical part. A parent's role is not just to enroll a child to school. They need to follow up so that their school is efficient, their school is well served. If money comes to the school, they need to know how much money has come and how it's going to be spent, and so on. So parents, again, I see a lot of hope if parents were to really play an active role.
What room do we have for technologies right now? Because Africa is still a developing continent, and we have a lot of need for those with technical skills. What part can technology play in that, in terms of developing the quality of education?
Technology actually can play a lot. One of the issues I've not mentioned, and that is critical, is adult literacy. It is in Africa where we have the most number of adults above 18 who cannot read or do basic computation. And yet, when you look at the coverage of mobile phones, for instance, most of these have mobile phones. So the question is, how can we use the mobile phone as a tool that promotes literacy, as a tool that promotes numeracy? So I think Africa is now a big consumer of technology, which is a good thing, that even the people who are not educated, even the poor, you'd find them with one gadget or the other. So I think the challenge is on us now as educators to come up with innovative ways of leveraging on technology to improve both quality but also access to education. And that, I'm glad that discussion has actually picked up.
Looking at the future, when you're looking at expanding the capacity of education institutions, right now you've just mentioned the fact that there are few institutions of learning. Are there conversations in terms of increasing institutions of higher education, ensuring that even we have institutions of lower education and entry points for children who are not accessing education?
Yeah, one of the things that is pretty poor is, first of all, wastage. When you look at the number of children that enroll in the first grade and that go through the entire pipeline, there's still too much leakage caused by dropout and caused by repetition. Now, one of the things we need to do is to ensure that we seal this leakage, to ensure that we are able to account for every child that enrolls in grade 1. Even if they transfer, we are able to account for where they are at in one point. So even with the institutions that we have, they are not optimally utilized. Then, of course, it becomes a very sharp pyramid in which at the base we have so many millions of children. Then when we come to secondary school, they are, the
number keeps
really
decreasing.
and then only a few are able to reach the top. So again, governments, I think, must incentivize expansion. Because if we rely on government alone to create the expansion that is required, it will take us too long. So the best thing to do is to create incentives for people to start private universities, because there are many people who can pay for themselves for good education. And that will reduce the load on the public institutions. And that way we are able to move faster. But as we are now, you find the government not giving any incentives, over taxing private investors, sometimes even challenging them. We know that basically the role of providing education, especially basic education, rests with the government, and the government cannot run from it. The government must be responsible for providing primary and secondary education. However, the same government can create incentives, like any things that supply of materials or even
subsidizing costs
for private investors, and that way would be able to move faster.
Hopefully there'll be a lot more that we can discuss in relation to the Kigali conference and of course in relation to research around the education sector. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. John Mugo. It was a pleasure hosting you and getting a peep into what's happening in the education sector, not only in Kenya, but also on the African continent.
Thank you, thank you. There is hope for Africa.
There's hope for Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. From that, we come to the end of the Table Talk session. There's nothing more that I can add to that, but of course we're going to be hosting more representatives who are interested in the education sector and who have a key stake in terms of ensuring that there's excellence in Kenya and also on the African continent. I hope you've been inspired and informed on what's happening in the education sector in Africa. From the team and myself, enjoy the rest of your viewing on Ebo Africa.